Here is the true story of Tracy Hunter, fully written, approximately 3,000 words, simple English, no headings or part labels. She was not supposed to win. Everyone in Cincinnati knew that. The political insiders knew it. The newspaper editors knew it. The men who had held power in Hamilton County for decades certainly knew it. A black woman running for juvenile court judge in a county where that seat had always belonged to a Republican, it was not the kind of thing that was supposed to happen. Not there. Not then. Maybe not ever. But Tracy Hunter did not spend much time thinking about what was supposed to happen. She had grown up watching the juvenile court system from the inside, not as a judge, but as a young attorney who sat in those courtrooms and watched children, most of them black, most of them poor, walk in without proper legal help and walk out with their futures already decided. She had worked as an attorney for neglected children. She had sat beside kids who had no one else sitting beside them. She had watched the system move like a machine that processed children instead of protecting them. And she had told herself something that she never forgot: if she ever went back to that courtroom, she would go back as the judge. She got her chance in 2010, when a sitting judge retired and left the seat open. She decided to run with less than 48 hours before the filing deadline. There was no grand plan. There was no campaign war chest waiting to be opened. There were just Tracy Hunter and the thing she had told herself years ago, and the 48 hours she had left to make it real. She won the primary easily. She lost the general election by a small number of votes, or so it appeared on election night. But something did not sit right with her legal team. Thousands of provisional ballots had been set aside, ballots cast at the correct polling location but at the wrong table inside that location. Tracy Hunter and her attorneys fought to get those ballots counted. The fight took 17 months and a federal lawsuit. It went all the way through the courts, challenged and appealed and challenged again. When it was finally resolved, those ballots were counted. She had won by 71 votes. On May 25, 2012, Tracy Hunter was sworn in as Hamilton County's juvenile court judge. She was the first woman ever to hold that seat. She was the first African American. Both of those things were true at the same time, in the same person, in the same courthouse where she had once sat as a young attorney watching children get swallowed by a system that did not care about them. She got to work. She banned the shackling of juveniles in her courtroom. The practice of putting chains and restraints on children, some of them barely teenagers, had been standard. She ended it. She said that children who came into her court deserved to be treated as children, not as animals. She pushed for changes in state law that would allow people with prior convictions to vote. She required that prosecutors hand over more evidence to defense lawyers. She put more staff in the vehicles that transported young offenders so that children were not crammed in together. She made sure juvenile offenders had clean underwear, an issue that sounds small until you learn that children in the system had previously been forced to share. She kept the names and faces of young offenders out of the news. She believed that a child who had made a mistake deserved a chance to grow past that mistake without a permanent public record following them forever. The local newspapers and TV stations did not agree. They sued her. They said she was violating the First Amendment. Some courts sided with them. Tracy Hunter maintained her position anyway, because she believed she was protecting children and that was what she had come to do. Not everyone was happy about any of this. The Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office was not happy. The local political establishment, the one that had not expected her to win and had not wanted her to, was not happy. She was a Democrat who had taken a seat that Republicans had held for a long time, and she was using that seat to do things that made powerful people uncomfortable. In September 2013, 2 special prosecutors were appointed to investigate her courtroom. The investigation centered on a specific incident involving her brother, Stephen Hunter, who worked as a youth corrections officer at the county's juvenile facility. In July of that year, a teenager in the facility had made accusations, and Stephen Hunter faced a disciplinary hearing that could end in his firing. On the evening her brother learned about the hearing, Tracy Hunter sent emails to staff at the facility. She also contacted the superintendent and requested documents related to the investigation. The documents were provided to her. She gave some of them to her brother. His attorney, seeing the documents, refused to accept them and warned that providing them could be considered unethical. Stephen Hunter was fired. Tracy Hunter was indicted. On January 10, 2014, a Hamilton County grand jury charged her with 8 felony counts. A 9th was added days later. The charges included forgery, tampering with evidence, theft in office, misuse of a county credit card, and having an unlawful interest in a public contract. She maintained her innocence on every single one. She said she had done nothing illegal. She said the prosecution was not about justice, it was about politics. It was about the fact that she had won a seat she was not supposed to win, and the people who wanted that seat back had found a way to remove her. The Ohio Supreme Court suspended her law license while the case played out. She lost her position on the bench. The courtroom she had fought so hard to reach was no longer hers. The trial lasted weeks. The jury deliberated and came back with one conviction: the charge of having an unlawful interest in a public contract. On the other 8 counts, the jury could not agree. They deadlocked. Only one charge stuck. One charge, out of 9. Judge Norbert Nadel sentenced her to 6 months in jail. Then the Ohio Supreme Court stepped in and stayed that sentence, meaning she did not have to go to jail yet, while she appealed. The appeals began. They would go on for years. She appealed to the state courts. The conviction was upheld. She filed a federal appeal. A federal magistrate judge recommended rejecting it. She appealed again. A federal district judge reviewed the full case and, in May 2019, allowed the sentence to be carried out. Nearly 5 years had passed since she was first convicted. 5 years of legal battles. 5 years of living under a suspended law license, unable to practice the profession she had spent her adult life building. 5 years of being told, in courtroom after courtroom, that what had happened to her was legal and proper and just. On July 22, 2019, Tracy Hunter returned to the Hamilton County Courthouse. The room was full. Her supporters had come, people who had followed her case for years, people who had stood outside the courthouse holding signs, people who had written letters and made phone calls and worn T-shirts with her name on them. They filled the seats. They stood along the walls. They had come because they believed, as she believed, that what was about to happen was wrong. Judge Patrick Dinklacker took the bench. Before he began, he read from some of the mail he had received. Postcards and letters from people asking him to free her, to see reason, to understand that this woman had dedicated her life to protecting children and that sending her to jail served no one. He read the words out loud with a flat tone, as if reading a list of complaints to be acknowledged and then set aside. He imposed the sentence. 6 months. The courtroom did not take it quietly. Tracy Hunter's supporters rose to their feet. Some of them shouted. Some of them cried. The sound in that room was the sound of people who had waited 5 years for justice and had just watched the door close in front of them. Tracy Hunter did not shout. She sat still. When the deputies approached her to take her into custody, she made her body go limp. She did not fight them. She did not struggle or scream. She simply let all the strength go out of her body and let herself become dead weight in their hands. It was a form of peaceful resistance as old as the civil rights movement itself, the same posture that protesters had used in the streets and at lunch counters when they refused to cooperate with a system they believed was unjust. The deputy grabbed her and pulled. She was dragged across the floor of the courtroom, backwards, limp, silent. The image was recorded on video and shared around the world within hours. A black woman, a former judge, the first African American ever elected to that bench, being dragged out of the courthouse like unwanted furniture. Her supporters erupted. One woman ran toward her and had to be physically restrained by deputies. People in the gallery screamed that there was no justice. Some of them wept. Outside, protesters gathered. That evening, some of them marched to the home of the judge who had imposed the sentence and chanted in the street. Tracy Hunter was taken to the Hamilton County Justice Center. She served 2 months of her 6-month sentence. In early October 2019, the Hamilton County Sheriff reviewed her case and determined that she had participated in a court-authorized work program and had met the requirements for release. She walked out of the Justice Center on October 5, 2019, 4 months ahead of schedule. She had served her time. But the fight was not over. Her law license remained suspended. The Ohio Supreme Court had pulled it in 2014, and it had stayed pulled through every year of her incarceration and beyond. After her release, she began the process of seeking reinstatement. She completed her probation in 2020. She continued to push through the legal channels, filing applications, presenting arguments, asking the court to look at what had happened and recognize that she had paid what the system demanded of her. In November 2023, the Ohio Supreme Court issued its ruling on her law license. The court handed down an indefinite suspension, a step that can sound harsh but is, in the legal world, the door that stays open. The court also credited her with the 9 years she had already spent under an interim suspension while her case worked through the system. Because of that credit, she was immediately eligible to apply for reinstatement. The majority of the court said that no sitting judge convicted of a felony had ever received a lesser sanction than an indefinite suspension. But they also acknowledged the years she had already served, and they gave her a path forward. Justice Patrick Fisher disagreed with giving her the credit. He believed she should receive no benefit for the years of waiting. He wrote his dissent and it was noted in the record. The majority ruled otherwise. The path was there. It is important to understand what Tracy Hunter actually did during her time as a juvenile court judge, before the charges and the trials and the dragging and the years of appeals. It is important because those things did not disappear when she was convicted. The children she had protected did not unexist. The changes she had made did not reverse themselves. The juveniles who had once been shackled in her courtroom were no longer shackled. That practice did not come back. The push she had made to change voting rights laws had worked. People with prior felony convictions gained the right to vote in Ohio, a change that affected thousands of people and that came, at least in part, from the legal battles fought in connection with her work. The children whose names she had kept out of the news had grown up without that permanent digital mark following them. Her attorneys always maintained that the prosecution had a political dimension, that she had won a seat that the Republican political establishment in Hamilton County wanted back, and that the charges were shaped by that desire. She herself said it plainly and repeatedly. Her supporters said it. The woman who had represented her in the original election dispute said that everything Tracy Hunter fought for in that ballot battle had changed the law for every voter in Ohio who came after her. Whether the prosecution was politically motivated or not, the fact remains that out of 9 charges, only 1 conviction resulted. A jury of her peers heard the full case and could only agree on 1 count. Her attorneys argued that even that single conviction was unjust, that sharing documents with her brother, a person who worked in the court system, did not meet the legal definition of having an unlawful interest in a public contract. That argument did not win in the end. But many people, in Cincinnati and far beyond it, never stopped believing it was true. What remains is a picture that does not require interpretation. A woman who grew up watching children fall through the cracks of the legal system decided she would become the judge and do things differently. She fought for 17 months just to take her seat. She took that seat and changed the way children were treated in her courtroom, in ways both large and small. She was investigated, indicted, convicted on 1 charge, stripped of her license, and eventually dragged out of a courthouse on camera while her supporters screamed her name. She went to jail. She came out. She started the process of getting her license back. She became a pastor at a church in Cincinnati, continuing the work of serving her community through a different institution. She did not disappear. She did not become quiet. She remained in the city where all of it had happened, among the people who had stood in the gallery that day and screamed when they watched her being dragged away. The video of that moment is still online. It is not long. It lasts only a few seconds. A woman in civilian clothes, sitting in a courtroom, making herself go still, and then being pulled backward through a door. Her face is calm. Her body offers no resistance. The deputy does the work of removing her, and she does the work of making that removal visible. She had spent years as the person who decided who walked out of that courthouse freely and who did not. On that morning in July 2019, she was the one being removed. She did not look afraid. She looked like a woman who had already made her peace with the fact that the system she had given her life to was now using its full weight against her, and who had decided that the most powerful thing she could do was refuse to make it easy. That is what you see in those few seconds of footage. Not a defeat. A position. Based on the documented true story of Tracy Hunter, attorney, judge, pastor, and the first African American woman elected to Hamilton County's juvenile court bench in Cincinnati, Ohio.